What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Geek Culture Explained. My name is Rob, and in this video, I'm going to reveal to you guys how it is that I know what's going on over the course of the Loki show and who the main villain of the show is by breaking down key points over the course of the first episode. So 3 things that I want to answer before we get into this. The first one, and probably the biggest question you guys have, is why don't the Infinity Stones work when they're in the offices of the TVA? So the TVA exists in what's called null space, which is basically a place outside the multiverse. But even if that wasn't the case, if they existed in just some alternate universe unto themselves, the Infinity Stones still wouldn't work, because the Infinity Stones only work in their native universe because they're powered by that particular universe. The second thing that I want to answer is Mephisto in Loki. No, the director of the TV show came out and said that's not the case, even though we got the scene when Owen Wilson's character asked the little kid in the church who did this, and the little kid points to what's basically a stained glass version of the devil on the window. The answer of the director is that's a reference to Loki being cast out of heaven, having horns on his head, that kind of thing. So it's not really Mephisto who's going to appear in Loki. It would be cool if they did, and it's entirely possible the director is just lying her ass off. But as far as we're aware, that's not the case. And that's actually a good thing, because I think the variant version of Loki that we're getting in the show is infinitely more interesting than Mephisto himself. The third thing that I want to answer, and it's really not even an answer so much as just an Easter egg that I noticed a lot of them, but these are the ones that I thought were the most interesting. The scene when Loki first goes to the TVA and he asks the question, what if I'm a robot and I don't know? That's a reference to Doombots. Doombots are basically robot duplicates of Dr. Doom that he created to operate in his stead when he doesn't want to appear in public. The reason why this is important is because the Doombots actually believe they're Dr. Doom. They don't know they're robots. So whenever it is the Doombots attack a city or something like that, it's usually only one that ever does it, then the Doombot operates as if they're Dr. Doom. It's a really cool concept. The other reference could simply be to life model decoys, because life model decoys don't know that they're decoys, they actually believe they're that particular person. And for the fourth little Easter egg that I found, I initially thought the little kid that Owen Wilson's character was talking to was Bennett Duperry. It's not. Bennett Duperry was born a couple hundred years before this kid. But who is Bennett Duperry? This guy is a universally powerful telepath and telekinetic. He's also a mutant. Yes, I will take every chance I can to speculate on the idea that whatever it is that I happen to see in the MCU is somehow going to bring mutants into the MCU. I'm sorry, I'm an X-Men fan. I will always do that. So having said all that, let's talk about this main villain of the series. If I'm being honest, I think this variant version of Loki is actually a character called Ikol. Yes, it's Loki spelled backwards. Nobody ever said Marvel was imaginative when it came to names. But here's the important thing when it comes to this. With Loki's deaths and resurrections, they've happened a lot over the years. The classic version of Loki, which is the version with horns and all that kind of stuff, he existed for years and years and years until you got to an event that was called Ragnarok. You guys have all heard of this. It's also called Thor Disassembled in the comics. Basically, over the course of this, Loki leads an attack on Asgard, Thor is ultimately defeated, and he ends up going on this kind of crazy quest. This leads to him destroying the World Tree. By destroying the World Tree, it also destroys all the Asgardians and Asgard itself. Eventually, a guy by the name of J. Michael Straczynski started writing the Thor comics, and when he did, he had Thor rebuild Asgard in Broxton, Oklahoma, and then basically started resurrecting all the Asgardians. This happened because the Asgardian spirits lived on, but they were placed inside mortal bodies. Eventually, what happened is that he came across the body that was supposed to belong to Sif, but Loki actually took it, and so Loki comes back as a woman. Now, following that, you go into the Lady Loki storyline, which doesn't last super long, and you get this really, really cool story where he actually impersonates the Scarlet Witch. But the whole idea of Lady Loki eventually goes into a story called Siege on Asgard. There's a lot of things that go on, none of which you guys really care about. The important thing is that Lady Loki, or at least male Loki, who had been Lady Loki at one point, ends up dying. This gives birth to a character named Kid Loki, but then it also goes into another version named Ikol. While Kid Loki did come after the events of Siege, honestly, Ikol is this kind of reincarnated version or the most modern version of Loki, but Ikol did some pretty twisted stuff. Initially, he was just kind of a guy who was trying to understand why he sacrificed his life during the events of Siege, but far into the future, he's a version of Loki that actually killed all the superheroes on Earth, or really killed everybody on Earth. He eventually became the All Butcher after taking the sword that belonged to Gore the God Butcher, who'd used it to kill all kinds of gods from across the universe. But the question that has to be asked here is, if it really is that future version of Loki, the character of Ikol, why is he traveling across the entirety of the multiverse, killing all these different members of the Time Variance Authority and stealing their timeline reset chargers? If I'm a betting man, I think there's only one of 2 possibilities here. The first is that this version of Ikol is working for Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror, as we know, is going to appear in Ant-Man 3. Yes, I know Kevin Feige said the TV shows are not going to be required viewing in order to understand what's going on in the movies, but you guys are taking that too literally. It's like comic books. Yeah, sure, there's a main event, which is basically the movies, but then there's also tie-ins. Are they required to understand the main story? No. Do they help? Yes. Now, if he really is working for Kang the Conqueror, I don't think those two things will be connected until we get to Ant-Man 3 and we actually see Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror. And if anything, I think it'll just bolster or at least go to show how wide-reaching the influence of Kang the Conqueror is. After all, he rules entire sections of the multiverse. The second idea, and the one that's probably the most probable here, is that that version of Loki is a time twister. So the TV show established the idea that the TVA was created by the Timekeepers, who exist to basically make sure that the timeline is maintained. The animation told us the Timekeepers came together as a result of the chaotic mess that was the war that initially started, that led to the entire madness that was the multiverse at that particular point in time. In order to keep that from happening, the Timekeepers condensed the entire multiverse down to a singular timeline in order to ensure that when new alternate realities were created, that it was a controlled process. They couldn't just be done arbitrarily. The Time Twisters were the first attempt to create Timekeepers. It ended up going awry. Now, I don't know if it's like it is in the comics where you have 3 Time Twisters and then you have 3 Timekeepers, but I would argue that if this is the case, then that is a Time Twister. And the idea here is to set the entire multiverse into madness, or at the very least, reset the entire multiverse. Because we know whoever this villain is traveling around, killing off all these different members of the TVA who are investigating divergent timelines that this person's basically creating, and then as soon as the TVA shows up, they're ambushed, they're killed, and then their reset charger's taken. And if you combine enough of those together, it's akin to what Gore the God Butcher was doing in the Jason Aaron Thor God of Thunder story, where he was looking to create a god bomb that he would send throughout the entire time stream and basically kill all the gods across the entirety of the universe. Except imagine that it would just reset the entirety of the multiverse. It's like creating a giant reset button. That's what I think is most likely going on here. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.